brother. How are you? I know. I need a hug. Everybody needs a hug today. SBC.family. SBC.family. Yes, sir. You in charge. You in charge. You want us to be all right, Dante and the two ends.
Testing what?
Maybe I'm foolish, maybe I'm blind, thinking I can see through this and see what's behind. Got no way to prove it, so maybe I'm lying. Take a look in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see it clearer, or are you deceived in what you believe? 'Cause I'm only human after all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Janae Miley Stark, and I'm the Caring Program Coordinator here at Second Baptist Church. And I want to welcome all of you that are here and online for our second Dialogue Across Differences. We had the political differences last month, and tonight we're doing racial and ethnic differences. Obviously, the topic is racial and ethnic differences, but I would not be remiss without mentioning that obviously the election was yesterday, and I imagine there's a lot of emotions in regards to that, and there's so much that intersects between our ethnic identity and our racial identity. So it is okay, obviously, if those questions come up. We have a wonderful guest list here tonight. We have Dr. Dante Morrison. We have Orange County Supervisor Vicente Sarmiento. We have Dr. Jackie Mack Harris, and then Mr. Rob Fisher here as well. It's going to be hosted by Pastor Ivan Pitts. If you have any questions tonight, those that are watching it on the live stream, please put them in the question bar. And then for those that are here, we have someone that has some question cards, and you can write those down, and then we're going to take questions later tonight. But let's get to it. I'm going to leave it to Pastor Ivan Pitts to start the discussion. Thank you, everyone.
So excited to be here for another conversation across differences We have an outstanding panel today, and I'm going to start with to my left, Rob Fisher, who would give us a little bit about who he is and what he hopes to accomplish from our time together today. Rob.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Rob Fisher, and I had the privilege of serving here at Second Baptist for about 18 months. About 6 months ago, transitioned into a different role at a nonprofit, and so I split my time between two different nonprofits, both of which really invest in the church and pastors and nonprofit leaders, trying to make sure that their souls and their selves are healthy. And so my goal from tonight is just to listen and to learn and to contribute where I can in ways that hopefully are helpful.
Okay, I am Dr. Jacqueline McHarris. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm an associate professor at Hope International University in the research department. And I assist my husband, who's pastor of First Baptist Church at Flame Valley in Riverside. And my hope today is just to add to the conversation and to hopefully create a safe space for challenging conversations and maybe get some good back and forth and hear some new ideas or some different ideas and to just be able to share that with others.
Thank you so much. Doc.
Good evening. I am Dr. Dante Morrison. I do a lot of work within the LGBTQ communities of color to really spark conversations about inclusivity and see how we can bridge gaps between not only the LGBTQ community and places of faith. And I am here tonight because I think this is an important conversation, especially on the heels of what occurred yesterday. And I think it's really time for us to dive into conversations about conflicts in the area of race and ethnicity so we can begin to have understandings, so we can all begin to corporately work together to bring about change.
My name is Vicente Sarmiento. I'm the Orange County Supervisor for the 2nd District, which encompasses the entire city of Santa Ana, parts of Anaheim, Garden Grove, Orange, and Tustin. I'm the former mayor here in Santa Ana and former council member, but I'm also a neighbor of yours. I've been in Orange County since 1965, and I know yesterday was a rough day maybe for half the country, but I know here in the county, I represent one of the most diverse districts in Orange County, and I know it took a very interesting turn to the right. The county was certainly trending differently, and yesterday's results, both at the congressional, legislative, and local level, really changed. So these dialogues, these conversations, maybe of differences, but also of commonalities, couldn't be come at a better time. But thank you, Pastor Pitts. Thank you, Second Baptist Church, for hosting. I feel like I'm home.
Well, you are at home, and you are a good friend of this church, and I'm going to push it right back to you. Our topic today is not about the election and politics, but we can't have a conversation about a race on this day without recognizing the racial differences as it relates to the voting. Not only was there cultural differences and ethnic differences, but there's also racial differences that were very clear in the polling and in our choice of candidates. So talk to me a little bit about how race plays in politics for you.
Sure. So, obviously race had a big role in, I believe, the outcome of yesterday's results and many other results, not just at the presidential level, but also Senate, congressional and races throughout the country. For me, I am only the 3rd Latino to serve on the Orange County Board of Supervisors in its history, and only the first person from Santa Ana in 74 years to serve on that board. So it's been a very homogenous board. It's been primarily, white men that have served, and just recently we've had some folks from Little Saigon and other Vietnamese and AAPI members. But for Latinos, even though we make up 33% of the county, I was the first in the history of the 3rd in the history of the county. So we know that the role of race plays a really important part in, what our politics are, what our policies, how we govern, what sort of direction we want to have, our funding go. And so what a lot of people unfortunately don't have is the engagement of politics and policies in their life. So some of the lowest propensity voters are voters of color. And I know one of the things that I saw drastically, in front of me when I was a council member and mayor and as supervisor is that young Latino men who I guess performed really well yesterday don't perform in local elections. And I know that they sometimes come out in single digits. So one of our challenges was to try to inspire them to have their voices heard. The demographic from 18 to 35 is one of the lowest performing demographics and groups throughout the country, but especially here in our city and in our county. So, Pastor, I think what I see is that there is some there's less homogeneity. I think, at least in the Latino culture. You see that second, third, fourth generations now are transitioning away from being more of a monolith and are moving in and maybe assimilating into more mainstream voting patterns and moving away from more race or ethnic based voting. And we still have some, recent arrivals that still vote as ethnic and racial blocs. I see that happening less with, Cubans in Florida, Puerto Ricans in the Northeast, and Mexican Americans here in the Southwest. So we just see that sort of now the Latino vote is certainly starting to dismember throughout the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's interesting because, Jackie, I want to ask you a question. If you can talk to me about why is it so important to understand the importance of race and your ethnic standing and culture? I'll tell a funny story that's kind of embarrassing, but it's really funny. Growing up in Los Angeles, everyone that I'd ever seen in my life that spoke Spanish was Mexican. So I go off to graduate school in New York City. I hear someone speaking what I think is Spanish, and I'm like, oh, my Mexican brother. And it was like culture shock. Mexican, that they were offended. And I'm Puerto Rican, and then I turn around, someone else was Cuban, and someone else was Ecuadorian. I'm like, wait a minute. Then I found out that this Spanish wasn't Spanish. It was Portuguese, and I was so confused. I was embarrassed, and I was offensive, and I didn't know what the heck was going on. Why is it so important to understand the difference between race and our ethnic connection and our cultural understanding?
I think it's important because it's about who we are, and we all want to be seen safe and secure, and that means knowing who we are, but having others know. So we want to be known as well as know ourselves. And race is how we identify in this country. It is how we've separated ourselves. And so when you don't feel like you fit, when you don't feel known, when you don't feel seen, it just creates a turmoil inside of you, and that comes out in relationship. Yeah. It comes out in our choices that we make. It comes out in how we parent. It becomes our new societal norms. And so it's important for us I try to teach cultural humility. And so I don't know what I don't know. And I went through a similar experience that you did when I went to the Air Force. I got to Washington, D.C., and it was 80% black. I grew up in L.A.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of everything, but mostly I grew up with blacks and Mexicans and Asians, and I got to D.C., and the culture was different, and how black people showed up in the world was different. I was encouraged to read in ways I've never been encouraged to read before. I was encouraged to vote. I was encouraged to care about things I had never cared about before. And so I think it's important because it's about our story. And whether you believe race is a real thing or not, or a created construct, it's still the way that we identify. Yeah. And we need to feel known as it's just core to who we are, yeah. And then that carries on to everything else we do. If we aren't sure about something, then you say so, right? So when I met Panamanians who were black, Spanish, I was confused. But people taught me things. I was able to say, I don't know, I'm confused. I'm a researcher, so I'm always asking questions and have been this way for most of my life. And so that's how I led into it. I just, tell me more about this, help me get to understand this. I have a Puerto Rican son-in-law from New York. And Even our foods are different. His first year in our family, he was sick. So why is race important? Because he eats differently than we do, but he looks like us. He's Puerto Rican and black. I'm thinking he can eat everything we eat. He just wants a chopped cheese. I don't know what that is. I've never been to New York. So it's important because it tells our story, and we want to be heard and seen. And so we need to be able to express our truth and then be open to somebody else's.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Dr. Morrison, in a moment, I want to talk a little bit about some cultural differences in the LGBTQ community. But Rob and I were talking earlier today about how do we really understand the difference between our racial identity, our ethnic identity, and our cultural identity, because that stuff gets all intermeshed. And one of the ways we looked at it is, generally speaking, your race has to do with your physical features, your skin color. And then when we talk about our ethnic identity, it's where we're from culturally, where we connect as it relates geographically. And then we talk about ethnic, it's the kind of norms, culture, we talk about the norms and the practices. Let me give you an example. You might not know this, but I'm mixed. I'm half black and half African American. And so I identify as a black male, right? And so my race is black, but my ethnic identity is American. But I am culturally Western American, California. And I have first cousins who have my same blood, that have my same name, and they are black, and they are Americans, but they are from Houston, Texas, and Louisiana. Right. Different culture. Right. And here's one of the ways we kind of describe it. I remember when we were little kids, we would go down south to Tennessee or to Louisiana or to Houston, and I would hear my cousins, when a parent would call them, an adult would call them, go, "Sir, ma'am," and we would laugh like, "Why y'all calling them sir or ma'am?" They would call us, we go, "Huh? What?" And the culture of the South, yes, even though my cousins are black Americans, different culture, different reality. Another way you can look at it, you can see someone who's Asian, but they're Taiwanese versus Filipino. Different race, different ethnic connection, and different cultural realities. Someone who grew up in the suburbs versus someone who grows up in an urban community and someone who grows up in the rural area. Different cultural realities. And I'm bringing that up because even in the LGBTQ community, you have same race, same ethnic connection, different culture. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Rob and I met right after the George Floyd death, the murder of George Floyd. And Rob was at an evangelical white church in northern Orange County. He put on a conversation with African-American men and women because he felt it was important. So, Rob, the question I have for you, why was that conversation important for you personally? And what was your hope for that conversation for your larger white evangelical community?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me personally, it was important for a variety of reasons. I smile looking at Jackie because we worked together. And Jackie was one of our team, and she was courageous enough to share her actual experience rather than, kind of maybe how she had to operate prior to that. And so I think when Jackie was fed up and had had enough and wanted to speak her truth, she was, again, courageous enough to share that with me and trusted me to meet her there. And so I think that started a different type of conversation between us. And so I think just my friendship and my affection for Jackie was part of why that was important to me. I think I grew up in Orange County in a middle-class white home. And then we moved across, my wife and I got married, and we moved across country to Chapel Hill and Durham, North Carolina. And talk about cultural shifts. Right? And so a significant cultural shift for us. But also, I think we were, there's racism everywhere. And so there was racism, growing up as a kid that I witnessed that was, all part of the milieu of Orange County. But it's a different kind of racism than exists in the South. particularly between black and white. And so for me and Kelly, my wife, as we were there, we were just driving in the car with another white couple from the South who made a racist comment about blacks. And Kelly and I were just dumbfounded that someone would actually not only think that, but would say that out loud. And so I think that, again, was an opportunity for me to recognize the reality of racism, the reality of these different, racial and ethnic differences. And so that was part of the reason why I felt like that was something we had to talk about. And then prior to George Floyd's murder, we as an organization hosted a conference on racial and urban trauma. And so that was in 2019. And I think for us, fortunately, in some ways, it prepared us to have a conversation that was fruitful, I think. And so I think all of those things were factors in terms of that decision. And I think my hope was that we would actually engage a topic that is so pertinent and relevant and so often avoided for fear. I think it's an uncomfortable topic. I think we're often worried that we're going to say the wrong thing or offend someone. And so I think inviting you and Jackie and Kevin onto that, and Kenneth onto that stage, just was, hey, maybe we can model how to have a conversation about a topic that's uncomfortable.
Thank you so much. Dr. Morrison, we talked about race. We talked about our ethnic identity, and then we talked about how culture is very specific. In your community, talk about some of the specific things that are culturally related to your community, to one of your communities.
Right, I was like, which one? I think it was interesting listening to all the shares thus far and the commonalities. When Rob talked about being in the car with a couple that looked like you, but the mindset was totally different. And I know that oftentimes when I mentor a lot of young men, young black gay men, I always ask them this question: are you a young black gay man, or are you a young gay man who's black? Which one are you first? And many of them, because of what they have experienced within their own communities, within their own black communities, when it comes to homophobia and being ostracized and alienated, they're like, I'm a young gay dude. They lead with the gayness because they can exit their black community and go to the gay community and be free and be themselves. So they will say, I'm gay first because black people don't really receive me. They don't welcome me. They don't accept me. So if I can rid myself of the blackness and just thrive in my gayness, I can live a free and healthy life. So I think that speaks volumes about when we consider race and culture and how certain ethnicities and races deal with persons of different sexual orientations or who exist outside of the heteronormative. It speaks to what do we really want to associate with, and we can go back to the brown paper bag test. Light skin versus dark skin blacks, who's more accepted, who's more welcomed. We think about white people who may take on black culture. Do we accept them? So in the LGBTQ community, you will find a different kind of family, a different kind of association, a different kind of comfort amongst those who share the same sexual identity or sexual orientation, because in their own spaces wanting to be a part of their race. And just one quick story. I recall when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, and there was a vigil in Lamert Park. And the young kids that I mentored, they came to the organization I worked at. We were having our group. Now, they lived in the community, but on their way to the center, they had been called all kind of derogatory names. And when they got there, they said, Dante, we want to go to the rally because, they're doing a candlelight vigil. I said, so you guys feel safe going to the rally and holding a candle and being arm in arm with the people that just talked about you? And they said, we'll stay here. Because their blackness was not welcomed, because their gayness was what was seen first. So regardless of all the fanfare and the flair that is associated stereotypically with gay persons, their blackness was not seen first. So they did not feel welcome. And I think that was a major eye-opener for me, that they cannot be comfortable amongst the people that share their hue because of who they sleep with or who they prefer.
Fascinating. You brought up this idea of what W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, this two-ness, or we call it today, this code switching. What is code switching? Jackie, you want to take that on? And then I also would ask the supervisor if that is also a concept in your culture as well.
Code switching. So when Rob was talking about how I responded after the George Floyd murder, I dropped my code book. So we show up in white space in a particular way. We are told what is professional. We're told how we can wear our hair. We're told what's civilized. And I said inked once to a friend, and she said, I've heard you speak, and you speak well. I don't understand why you would say that. And I was like, oh, wait, no, we're not actually friends. We're acquaintances. She doesn't actually know me. So she'd never experienced me just being. And my kids used to say they could tell if I was working or if I was talking to friend or family, because my work voice is very professional. They'll tease me and say, because now sometimes they answer the phone and they mimic me, and so they're like, okay, let's do mom. And so they call it my white work voice. And we've been trained to show up that way. I was in the military, and that's really where I joined when I was 18. And so I learned there that braids in my hair was unkempt and uncivilized and wouldn't be tolerated. I learned that my hair needed to be straightened. In basic training, I had to straighten my hair and shave because the TI wanted all of us to wear the same outfit, and he wanted us all to look the same. And so I needed to look like they looked, rather than me just being able to show up as I am. So there were many messages. My mother's worked for corporate America her whole life, and so she's always said, well, that's not tactful. You need to say it this way. So I was trained to speak a certain way with people, and then when you're with your friends and your family, you just are who you are, and that layer goes away, unless, of course, your lifestyle, who you love, disqualifies you from the culture, right? Then you code switching looks a little different there. But at a certain point, I noticed feeling a little death every time you have to pretend when you have awareness. Because prior to George Floyd's murder, I don't think I had a good awareness. I got a seat at the table, and if I don't have one, I'm bringing my own. But I'm coming to the table. And then George Floyd's murder happened, and I was like, doesn't matter if I'm at the table, they're still killing us. It doesn't matter if I'm at the table, they still aren't actually hearing us. And so code switching is a way of communicating that says, yes, your way is fine. Of course, yes, ma'am. And I think it hides a little bit of ourself for protective reasons. And then when we're in our safe zone and with our own culture, we feel a little more free. And I never even really thought about myself code switching really until I wrote that text message. And the first time it came out, I was like, can I say all that? And I realized I have to say all that. However they take it, but I have to say all that. So I'm much more free being me. But as a therapist, I remember the first time I sat with someone, I came out and I told my supervisor, there's too much Jackie in the room. I can't not be this and do therapy. So I'm not good at code switching in the therapy room because I've got to work to be present with you. And that means I need to be in my body and be here. And so what I have accepted is that if I'm not the right fit for you, I'm not the right fit for you. But you're going to get the real me, because that's the only way I can do therapy is to be authentically who I am. And that means that sometimes I'm going to say ain't, And sometimes I'm going to clap my hands and roll my neck. And sometimes we're going to laugh at funny things. And I'm just going to be me and be okay being me. And that has worked in my practice. But in my practice, I talk to my clients about these things as well. Okay. I try to create a safe space for them to have the difficult conversations with me that they can't have with someone else.
Yeah. Supervisor Sarmiento, can you relate to this concept of code switching?
So, Dr. Jackie, you put it really well, because I do code switching all the time in my line of work, right? So as a politician, as an elected official, my district is pretty diverse. So there are some very conservative pockets of Orange County that we all know. Look, the county's more diverse than it was back in the 60s when my family arrived, but it's certainly not a place that has, I think, risen over some of its historical problems that it's had. That said, there are parts of my district where we have some very, very affluent folks who I need to go address. Whether they're district court judges, whether they're CEOs from the corporate world, whether they're professors from academia, and my conversation with them will be very distinct than the ones that I have with community members in El Medina, or whether they're in downtown Santa Ana. So code switching for us, for those of us who are Latino, because our code switches from language, from English to Spanish. So being fluent in Spanish, I can talk to some of those recent arrival undocumented immigrants who are my residents, and I make them feel comfortable, because if I'm able to speak to them in their language, they feel like they're being heard, that you're not talking down to them. But I can't do that if I'm speaking with, Judge Carter in his district court, chamber. I have to speak to him, and I almost have to show my resume depending on the audience, right? I have to say, look, I'm a lawyer. I graduated from UC Berkeley, got my economics degree, and I got my law degree from UCI. I have to almost recite that in verse, depending on the audience. But when I go talk to my folks who are, homegrown, just got here, very fearful of meeting a county supervisor, I try to make sure that the conversation is one that they can relate to. But we're switching back and forth all the time in our worlds, because we know that people judge us, and I feel judged depending on the audience that I'm speaking with. So it's a skill, it's a talent, it's something, unfortunately, that we have to do, because we can't always be our authentic selves everywhere we go. But there is a way to do it deliberately when you're talking to others that may not feel like, you all are doctors, you all are pastors, we all have influence in our communities. And when we're speaking to humble working folks, they want you to be able to be real. And I will drop an F-bomb every once in a while, and I will talk in some vernacular that's just street. That has never left me. But at the same time, that's the authentic person that people can really relate to and realize, you're no different than me. You may have some power and authority because of what you've done, but you and I come from the same place. You and I can relate to one another. So, we do that all the time. But Dr. Jackie, thank you for prefacing that, because it laid it out perfectly.
It's interesting, because what you really described to some degree is how do you connect with people, meet people where they are. And when people understand that, they'll say, he's so down to earth, right? But sometimes when you sit back and you look at it, we are often, Rob, believe it or not, disqualified by our skin or our culture before people even get a chance to know who we are. So I have a cousin who went to Johns Hopkins Medical School, and she was doing a dual degree, an MD, PhD. And she is a researcher, and she is in epidemiology. And so as she's interviewing in her last year of grad school, getting her PhD, the black dean of the department pulls her into his office and says, listen, as you are going to interview, they're going to ask you questions that they're not going to ask your white counterparts. Don't answer them. They're going to ask you questions about if you know this, if you know that. You're going to say, I am at Johns Hopkins Medical School. I know everything I'm supposed to know. Ask me about my fit and ask me about my research, but don't ask me about my intellect. And he had to do that with all the minority students that were in the program. Something very similar happened to some friends at the University of Chicago Business School. Same thing. They're going to see your skin, and they're going to try to justify if you belong in the room. You have to walk in there like you belong there.
Yep.
Yeah. And so Rob, since you are the our only vanilla brother on this on the panel, have you ever had conversations with your fellow brothers and sisters that you had to help them to see the validity of non-whites based upon their skin color? And what does a conversation like that look like?
Yeah, so yes, and it probably varies. I mean, some of it has been very personal, right? So my grandparents, who had a certain perspective on people of color, and I think oftentimes weren't even conscious of what they were saying, I'd like to think, or weren't aware of these deep-seated beliefs that they held. My wife's parents grew up in Kentucky, and...
Okay, say no more.
And so I think there have been many conversations throughout the years with them, too, of trying to educate them of just how often, and it's not just them, I think it's oftentimes we, but make such quick judgments or make a flippant statement without really thinking about what we're saying. I think of my parents' friends who would make derogatory remarks about Latinos, but then they had real good friends who were Latinos, right? And it's kind of like, wait, what are you doing? I don't think you actually are pausing to consider the comment that you're making. Because if you really felt that all Latinos were that, you wouldn't be friends with this one person, or you wouldn't put that person that works for you in that position of authority within your business and trust them with the things that you trust them with. And so I think for some, it's helping them realize that as tempting as it is to take a individual experience and to generalize it, it's really problematic to do so. And so I think within those spaces, and then I think, Jackie and I working at the same organization, and at the time that I was leading that organization, a number of our board members were older white men. And so as we navigated 2019, 2020, 2021, and just the political division, the racial tensions, all of that, just that overt expressions of racism, and the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I think a number of us within the organization were very aware that we did a good job of serving people with resources. We didn't do a good job of serving people without resources.
We said we are here to serve the local church.
Yes, amen. Yeah.
The motto was, we're here to serve the local church.
Yeah, and the local church is diverse. And the local church is church with resources and church without resources. And so though we said that we were here to serve the local church, really there was this awareness of, wow, no, we serve the church with resources, and we serve the majority culture church. And so there was a desire to change that. So I think that required lots of conversations that sometimes went well, sometimes didn't go well. So, I mean, hopefully that's an answer to the question.
I really appreciate it. Anyone want to add or respond to
so much has been, this is like amazing, this conversation, but I've been in situations where I've been in white spaces and through code switching, I have made white people so comfortable with me that they forgot I'm black.
Yeah.
To the point, even when George Floyd was murdered, it was kind of just casual conversation, and I'm looking like, y'all do realize I'm black and what happened. Also, this really affected you, Dante. I'm black, and we do that so often that we try to befriend and show that, see, we're cool, you can like us, we're good. And it becomes this whole thing where we're now disassociated from the people that they talk about in private parties and whatnot. And sometimes we'll even slip up and say it in front of us because they forget that we're part of that community or that ethnic population. And I think that happens all the time. And I have experienced, even with the code switching in church, I've had to code switch so often just to be validated in my ability to preach, teach, minister, my anointing. My sexual orientation has nothing to do with how I deliver God's word and how you can receive what God has to say for you. But I am disqualified constantly once they find out. You know, and it's like, but I'm still your black brother that grew up in the black church alongside you, that your grandma prophesied over and said, you're going to be a pastor one day. So now God's word is not the same. And I think that code switching is such a powerful question that can go through so many different lanes. And I love that you are unpacking it because it's not talked about enough. And the trauma behind it is not talked about either. Imagine how trying it is. I'm an Air Force vet as well. Imagine how trying it is to go into a system to serve your country, and your blackness is highlighted above your ability to just be a battle buddy alongside someone. So now I got to switch who I am to change the narrative of what you believe about me and the people that I'm ethnically connected to. You know, that's traumatic. And that's a lot to have to carry. And we don't get the proper therapy needed to unpack it. Jackie, I see you lit up.
I'm thinking, what I'm hearing as you're talking is melting pot, melting pot, melting pot. This word just keeps playing in my head. And I think I'm concerned about how often we have to code switch because it feels like an attempt to erase. And we've colluded with the dominant culture in a decision to erase some part of ourselves. I usually say I don't want to be a part of a melting pot. I'd rather be in a salad bowl. I want my lettuce to be lettuce and my tomatoes to be tomatoes and my dressing to be dressing, and I want it to all come together and be fabulous together, but I don't want it to be put into a blender and turned into something new just to satisfy one demographic's palate. And that's really what we're doing when we're code switching. As an academic, I see it in writing. So last Friday we had our CCP reviews, and so we, as faculty, come together and sit in a room and we read these 30-page case presentations that the student therapists have had to do as their capstone project. And sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's painful. But when I'm reading them, I can almost always tell if English is a second language because they're having to translate in their mind, and they're learning this new language of therapy, and they're having to incorporate that, and you see the struggle of them tripping over themselves in the paper. But then I can sit with that same person and have a conversation, and they can tell me everything they would do with that client, and it's right on point. And so when I talk with my bosses, we talk about how do we make room for that. So what we've done is when someone really struggles in their writing, I will bring them in for an oral. I have ADHD, so I'm always looking for ways to help someone accomplish the task in a way that maybe doesn't look like mainstream wants it to look. And so if you need to come and do this orally, I got 2 hours today, let's do it. And so that we can make another way. If you need to do it in Spanish, then let's do it in Spanish. We're still in the training phase. This should be where we are able to try some new and different things, and so that they are getting the fullness of what they came for, that education. And so it concerns me a little bit because we do it so well and without even thinking. And I noticed in the DNC, thinking about politics, the thing I kept telling everybody was like, I think everybody gave up code switching for this. Because even Clinton was like, I was like, where he is? I didn't know he was that country. But you could just hear it in the word choices and the short stories he was telling. And so I'd like for us to be able to be more free, but that would require for people to be able to accept the differences. And I think that there's a lot of fear behind accepting that.
Yeah, so there's some. So my producers sending me messages about staying on script. I don't listen anyway, because there are 3 words that have come up that I kind of want to explore, and I think that they have a lot to do with race. and our culture and our ethnic identity, our understanding. One word is fear, another word, trauma, and then the other word is our phrase. What does it mean to be an American for some people's experience is completely different from others. You take people who are traditionally African Americans in this country, their origin story for their generations is different. Our American journey. You take Supervisor Sarmiento, and he said when they came here, I think he said in the 60s, this is a different, so when he came here, when we were brought here, and some folks had just chose to come here, right, or been here. And so you have a different understanding of America based upon your race, your ethnic identity, and your culture. And so I want to talk about how we can have so many differences and how we can be so offended by an election. Because what the election means for some racial, ethnic groups and the election of a Kamala meant something very much different to other racial, ethnic groups with the election of a Trump. And it's offensive because there are fears, there's trauma, and there's this idea of what America is. Does that make sense to you all? Supervisor Sarmiento, do you want to just kind of respond to those? Do you agree, disagree? Is there anything you want to add to that?
You know, I guess just to finish up on the last topic, though, I did want to say something, you know, speaking to what everybody was saying, is that, and with respect to my brother Rob, I want to say something because being in spaces where you're with other people of color, I always feel a little less defensive about who I am. So when I am speaking to a crowd of, or in a group where there's mostly folks who are, you know, Anglo, white, whatever, I always feel like, you know, you have to change the way you speak, and I have to almost justify, again, you know, putting out that resume. But, you know, and then when somebody says, well, look, that, you know, that person's articulate, it's almost derogatory to say that because it's a way to say you're okay, but the rest of you have a long ways to go, right? So it depends on the environments we go in. But you know, as it relates to, you know, race and what happened yesterday, but what happened yesterday has happened in many races and in many elections. So that was just on the largest stage possible, but we've had many ethnic elections that have been decided based upon your race, based upon your ethnicity. And I don't think we're there yet to say, you know, we're purely going to judge this person on the merits, because we had a convicted felon running against somebody who was overqualified for the office of the presidency. And to be able to, like, say, let's just talk about, you know, the substantive nature of what these folks have and how qualified they are. If we were to remove everything else and just based upon experience and background, having to do nothing with race and these tribal features that, you know, that follow both parties, look, you know, the vice president was just way overqualified. She actually went to law school with my sister, so I'm a little biased. But the way I see it is that we haven't gotten over that, because I know that there still is, and what I stay up at night thinking about is not so much, you know, now the president-elect Trump, because he is now a one-termer. He's going to be there for 4 years. We've withstood it for 4 years, you know, in 2016. We'll survive again, and he will go away. But half the country that followed him, now a majority of the country that followed him, that won't go away. That's generational, because you had a lot of young men and women who, despite what he said, as harmful as he was to, you know, especially immigrants and Latinos, I mean, he really villainized us, he used us, he abused us in the process to instill fear in people. And still, young Latino men were one of the largest segments of his voters. And so that is really painful for me to understand and try to, you know, unload and just kind of, you know, break down, because I see a lot of self-loathing in my community, because, again, many of us are recent arrivals. I wasn't born here. I came here as a child. So we straddle back home and being here. Are we American? Are we hyphened? Are we, because I'm not Mexican, I'm Bolivian. So I'm Latino, but again, as a race, but ethnically born in Bolivia. Not many of us, right? But when I see other Latinos who I know were scapegoated, were used, and they're still out there voting, that's a dynamic that's really hard for our community to come to grips with. And I think that it's going to take a while for us to realize first, second, third generations, they're transitioning out of, again, that monolith, and that's making it difficult for me to understand. But, we see that the appeal is we don't want to be part of a minority group anymore. We want to be like the mainstream. We want to be American. And look, the mainstream just doesn't see us that way yet. And it'll take a long time. And do we ever blend in? So it's just an interesting thing. I think, all communities of color maybe struggle with that. But look, I mean, it's visible. Like you said, the hue on our skin just makes it impossible for some of us to be able to be truly considered American in the eyes of those who see us differently.
Yeah, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I always am fascinated by the fact that sometimes African Americans feel like we're the only group that experiences racism in this country, but many other ethnic groups feel it as well. It may have a different genesis, and it may come at you differently, but it's the same. And what's interesting is that when we talk about the word fear, and I'm not trying to get into where I voted to the left or to the right. That's not the point. The point of my comments are there are many people who believe they voted the way they voted yesterday because they're fearing of the browning of America, right? And that they're losing their majority status. And many people believe, you talk about some of these political issues. I know this is not a political conversation, but it's about race. But race and politics are so interwound, you can't separate them. And many people believe that abortion is not an issue of our religion, but it's really an issue of that white women get abortions at a higher rate than any other race, and it's about increasing the numbers so that they don't become a minority. It's about power, it's about numbers, and it's about fighting the browning of America. And if that is the case, then we will always, those who are not white, will always feel the heat of bias, the heat of racism, and the heat of being othered. And so that is just the reality of what it is.
Well, and Pastor, I think that race is political because it was a construct that was developed for political purposes.
It was.
So we just have to face that. But we have an 8th grade average reading level in our country, and so people aren't reading enough to know that. And we aren't allowed to teach history as it actually happened. And we're not allowed to teach critical race theory, which is just thinking critically, period. So I think it is political. I think it is a part of the conversation so that people who are listening can at least hear that. Somebody told us these races existed. It's not natural. Someone just divided us so that they could divide us politically. And it is about power.
I'm so glad you said that because I tell people that all the time, race is a social construct. Thank you for saying that because we do not hear that enough, and like you said, it is not taught in an elementary level. You have to get to college to really begin to unpack how all of this works. It is a social construct created for power and control. So you're absolutely right. It is part of politics. It's a part of it, and then you throw colorism in there, and that's a whole different beast.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even when you read the Bible, right? People say, well, how do we read the same Bible and come with different interpretations and different responses? And I think culture and experience has a lot to do with it. Just take the book of Exodus. And again, I won't preach today, but if I do decide to preach, I'll certainly collect the offering. Let the church say,
amen.
All right. So the book of Exodus, when black people hear this story of the Exodus, of an enslaved people being freed by a God of liberation, that sounds different to folks who have a history of slavery and those who have a history of being a slave master. And so that resonates different, so then we respond different to the same story, but our experiences are different. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
We're different characters in the story.
We're different characters.
We're different characters in the story.
Yes. And
Same story.
And when the visual of a Christ is not reflective of you, your approach is different. So if you see a white Christ and you are a white person, there's a relationship there. There's a commonality. But if that Christ, blonde hair, blue eyes, does not look like you or anyone in your family or your bloodline, your approach is a little bit more docile. Like, I don't have the right to get that close to this God that does not look like me. So that arrogance that is there is not present. Sorry, Pastor Pitts. I know this is not talking about
What you just said made me think of how so many churches are displaying that image. And I've often wondered, how are we to help people see Christ and to connect with him when they can't see themselves in him? If we were created in God's image, it just makes sense to me that all of us should have, our picture of Jesus should look like us. Right. We're created in his image. But that's not how we've been conditioned. We've been socialized to believe that white is right, and so God must be white. And then, of course, we come to that differently. We come more bowed down and more humble. But that feels like it's more to the religion than it is to the actual God.
So let's kind of go to, as we enter the last phase of our conversation, what are some of the solutions? We definitely know that there's been trauma as relates to our racial experiences, whether we are from Bolivia or whether we are from Brooklyn, right? There has been some misunderstandings, some misconceptions. There's been some ignorance as we talk about even our, not just your grandparents, but even my grandparents and even my mother to some degree, her understanding of race and how she is one of the most loving people you'll ever meet. But at the same time, she would tell us she hated white people. I'm like, wow, how could you be so loving to everybody in the neighborhood and you hate white people? Like, that don't make sense, right? But it was her experience. So the question becomes, what role does fear play in our having conversations about race and our ethnic identity and our culture, and how do we overcome those fears? So what are some of we can have conversations all day about our experiences and how this country is or is not racist, but we do have a fear about having conversations about race. And how do we get over those fears and really begin to make genuine connections? Anyone?
Well, look, the more conversations like this that can occur, the better, because sometimes we speak to ourselves in vacuums or in safe spaces and we'll complain about, our experiences. I think having many of us speak from different perspectives really does help, because look, I'll learn how somebody is interpreting what I'm saying, or how an issue or something affects a community, and it helps me understand. And I just wanted to go back to something that was being said, is that I really don't think we'll ever be able to solve or even attempt to take some steps forward on race and understanding if we don't understand our history. And so being critical about our country's history is incredibly important to me as a policymaker. Like, I can't, and as a lawyer, I can't look at the Constitution and say, I want this strictly interpreted the way it was written, because it was written by slave owners, and it was written with a 3/5 rule. I'm not in it. I wasn't thought about when it was written. So it is hard to say, I am a lover and believer of the Constitution if that document was fundamentally flawed from its beginning. That's just the way I understand it. And for us to now not want to consider the truth and the history of this country, look, all countries have issues, but we need to struggle with them. We need to have ethnic studies that'll help students at a very young age understand we're an imperfect experiment. We're an imperfect country with a troubled past. We can make it better. Nobody is saying that we're not going to be proud of it. We're not going to pledge allegiance to it. We're not going to support it and fight for it the way, you all have, and the way I've served as an elected. But we have to grapple with its history, with its troubled history, so we can move beyond it. And if we're going to try to, ban books or ban ethnic studies and prevent people from like trying to understand what our history is, then look, we're never going to get to that place of understanding. We have to be honest. And so for me as a policymaker, I want that conversation to happen. It has to happen because that's where good policy comes from. And the last thing, I'll say, Pastor, is that, look, I know our communities, I have 2 sons. One of them is gay. The other one is a very big young man. I fear for their lives every day they leave my house for different reasons, right? The big one is because he likes to wear a hoodie, likes to put it over his head. He's the most gentle person you'll ever meet, but I know how he is going to be profiled when he leaves the house is something that I fear as a father, but I fear even more as a policymaker, or as much as a policymaker, because I know there's thousands of kids that way that go out and could be victims of that. So how do I help, adopt policies that will prevent that? And my son, who is gay and he's queer, he does not want to come back to Orange County. He's living in South America, and it's not much safer, but he just doesn't feel like Orange County is a safe space for him. So those are the things that we need to have conversations about so we can make sure that we start changing our patterns, our policies, and our practices.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to make a comment and then just pick up, anyone can pick up on these comments. I was in a session last night, and it talked about the levels of friendship. And it says that your friendship, when it gets to the level of a genuine commitment, that means it can handle conflict without the fear of losing the relationship. But then it says the ultimate level of a friendship is not just commitment that can handle conflict, but a commitment that can handle conflict, and it gives you permission to critique one another. And I think that's what Supervisor Sarmiento was talking about. We have to get to a point where we're so committed to each other as brothers and sisters that care for each other that we are open to hear the critique about how we can be better as a country. And I think that, we say things like we're the greatest country in the history of mankind. We have the largest economy in the world. We have the most nuclear weapons. We have this, we have that. We're the best in athletics and so forth and so on. But even being the best, we can be better because we're only as good as how we treat the least of these. Rob, you've been quiet for a little while. You can respond to anything that you've heard so far.
Yeah, I think, I'd love what, Supervisor Sarmiento shared. I think what you're sharing, Jackie, what you've shared, Dante, what you've shared. I think when it's fear, right? To me, it taps into this feeling that I think we have that we have to be all good. And there's this tendency to split, right? So we split off the parts of ourselves that we don't think are good. Because if we feel like if we accept them, something bad will happen. And I think we've done that with our country, right? You talk about, all these things that we proclaim as great, but there's just as many things that are equally terrible. When you look at our history, whether that's slavery, whether that's the encampment of Japanese Americans during World War II, whether that's the deportation of 1 million, Mexican Americans or in the early 1900s, those are not very pretty things to look at. But I think the way forward is to learn from our mistakes. And if we're unwilling to acknowledge our mistakes, then it's going to be really difficult to learn from them. And so we tend to repeat them, right? And so I think just as you're talking, there's so much. Supervisor Sarmiento, when you're talking about just these two choices we had in, elected presidents, I think if you look at even gender, right, and how much did gender play a part? I know tonight we're not talking about gender, but there's fears around gender. What would happen if we had a female president? And so I think and both parties probably played into fear, right? And so I think President-elect Trump played into fear. And the Democratic Party played into fear a little bit, and maybe some of those fears are justified, and some of them, are less so. But man, we make so many decisions every day based on fear.
Yeah.
You know, the spaces we enter into or the spaces that we avoid, how much we show up, how much we don't. So it's huge.
And for me, what I think is most unfortunate is that as a Black American, it is sad that many Black Americans think that our history began when the first slave ship docked, because our young people were not taught about African history. We're not taught about the land from whence we were enslaved. We're only taught about the enslavement period to coming to America. So it's hard to stand on truth and stand on facts and have your chest out and strong when you're not really sure of who you are. You can say, I'm from Bolivia, and probably give a whole breakdown of Bolivian culture, Bolivia. Many Black Americans do not even want to go to Africa. I don't want to go back there. I ain't from there, yada, and just get angry about it. And it's like, yo, but that's where we were enslaved. Go back. And when I went back to Africa, it changed my whole purview on American culture and our experience. And I think when we talk about that fear, because many Black Americans, we are trying to compete in a system that was not designed for us and be affirmed and validated and approved in a country that enslaved us. And now we're trying to say, see, we're worthy, we're good, we're just as good as what you thought we were. We can compete, we can win awards and trophies and Olympics and all kind of stuff. Please welcome us. So when we look at a Black female vice president, sitting vice president, going against the opposition, but not getting 100% of the Black vote, that discourages me, because it should have been 100% of the Black vote, because we should know who we are as Black people and Black Americans. Say, yo, I'm behind the sister because I know from whence we came and what we have to fight through here in this country. And I think that's the part that hurts me most, is that our young children are not afforded opportunities to have critical conversations, critical race theory, to really understand their lineage and where they came from, and not at beginning when they were put in shackles and chains and shipped across to this land. That's not where our history began.
Yeah, my fear is, just to be totally transparent, is that someone would hear this conversation today and think all we did was bellyache about how bad, Latinos, Blacks have it. We bring the token white guy on to try to make us feel better, but he's probably a progressive, so he's not really white anyway. You got all this stuff. And really, for those who have the courage to listen today and to be critical, think about not your own story, but the stories of those who are here. And how do you begin to spend time? And how do you begin to listen to people who are different from you so that you can learn? Rob, you opened up with a story about listening to your friend Jackie. And for me, it'd be offensive and almost heresy for me not to talk about the importance of love and compassion is the gateway to authentic relationships and authentically giving people permission to be their true selves. If I love Supervisor Sarmiento, if I love Dante, if I love Rob, if I love Jackie, then my job is to help them be the true expression of who they are without fear, and growing to accept them for who they are and not trying to shape them to what I need them to be for my comfort.
Because God didn't even do that.
God didn't even do that.
And yet we spend so much time trying to get other people to be how we want them to be so that we can be comfortable, which is one of the things that makes the election so disheartening for me. I watched a TikTok video a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just scrolling mindlessly, trying to wind down. And it was a Native American young man, and he said, I'm sick of seeing posts about how awful it is that Israel is occupying Palestine. Ooh. And yet here y'all sit in America. And I was like, oh, okay, well, Yeah, I didn't know what to do with that. It's like if we think about how all of us got here, we forget somebody was here when we got here. And we completely eliminate that from the conversation. So I feel like the strategy is still working. If we keep people uneducated and fearful and hating one another, the power will remain in power, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
You know, if I could just jump in,
Sure.
So that was really, really powerful, because I wouldn't know how to respond to that either. But if we don't have the conversations that we need to have and be honest and be accurate and be factual about, so the whole thing about belly aching, I think that it's I guess a desire to get to the truth. And if we can get to that truth, look, all of us, you've served, in the military, you as well. And so, and we all try to serve. We love this country. To be critical of it is the most patriotic thing we can do.
Absolutely.
There is nothing more patriotic than to say, you know what, we have flaws, but we want to make it better. The whole purpose of putting those flaws out there, being critical of it, constructively critical of it. How do we move beyond it? How do we move beyond that next generation saying, where's my role in this place? Where's my role in this experiment? And if we can do that, that is something that we move this country forward, and we can keep it strong. But if we're hiding the truth, if we're scared of how somebody's going to feel about it, then look, we're never going to get past this. And this is a struggle that's going to dog this country for a very long time. We all just need to realize, look, let's just accept it. Things, flaws were there, mistakes were made, horrible things were done. But until we face those, it's like a family. If a family doesn't deal with its own struggles, if there's been domestic violence, if there's been abuse, and you never deal with it, that's never going to heal. So that's where I see we love our country. That's why we're trying to force ourselves to look at us honestly. And that's the way I feel as an elected, is that, look, I can't do this without being honest with people that I represent, because they sent me here to do that. I can't ignore that. But I think, I think just having these conversations, just getting back to that construct, if somebody sees this and they say, oh, these guys, they're just moaning, groaning. No, there is an end to this. There's a result. There's a reason why this is happening.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting because I was telling my son a couple of days ago, I said, if you want to be great, you have to stand critique. I said, Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. Serena Williams, the greatest tennis player of all time. Tiger Woods, maybe the greatest golfer of all time. All of them had coaches, and a coach's job is to critique so that you can be better. I have a question from the audience for you, Dr. Dante. What does a truly inclusive community look like to you? And after you answer your question, we're going to close out with a final comment from each of us.
Honestly, this panel is truly inclusive. In the back, I got to meet Rob. When Rob walked in, I was a little like, oh, okay, here we go. A white guy on the panel, but Rob is cool as a fan. And he brought your cootie board. That was amazing. But that's diversity. That's diversity. I'm an openly gay minister, and I'm sitting next to a heterosexual pastor, that sees me for who I am. And I'm not the exception. I'm included. I'm sitting next to my Bolivian brother who can break this all down and can do the hood vernacular, but also code switch. And then my queen right there who understands critical race theory. This is inclusivity for me. And this is what is needed. This is what is important, that we can all leave here and go to the Sizzler. We can all have constructive conversation. I don't see Rob as a white man. I see him as an ally in the fight and I almost said make America great again, but an ally in the fight to better our country, because I cannot do it alone. I can't. I need the diversity of this platform, because you can enter rooms I cannot. I can enter rooms you cannot, and so on and so on. This is what inclusivity looks like to me.
That's wonderful, wonderful. One thing you forgot, that he can also drop the F-bomb when he needs to.
You know, I mean, and we'll find out.
Mess around, you'll find out. You'll find out, right? So I think that we have had a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And in no particular order, what are your final thoughts? What do you want to leave the audience with?
My final thought is on how do we make it different for those who aren't doing this. I'm a couples therapist, and one of the things I teach people to do is to listen to what someone says, mirror it back for them, hear what they said, not what you think they said or what you think they meant by what they said. Hear the words that came out of their mouth. If you don't understand, be curious, ask for clarification, but get an understanding of what they were saying and intending to say, and then validate that, which isn't always agreeing. It's just, I understood the words that came out of your mouth. And then empathize. Wow, that must have been hard. Wow, that must have made you really sad. Wow, that must be scary. If we can just do that and manage our own emotional regulation while hard conversations are happening, I think that we can have more of these conversations, and it's definitely, I think, what it takes in order for us to make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, look, I just want to say this is, the conversations we need to have. But look, I think all of us have some common thread that we want things to improve. I think these conversations need to happen with people who are diametrically opposed to what we believe in, right? That don't want to have these conversations, that have difficulty with dealing with people of color and with people from different perspectives. And that's who we need to be talking with. And that's really going to be tough. That's going to be difficult. But I know that in the end, that's where the value comes from, is talking to somebody who's completely opposed to who you are and finding that common humanity and saying, look, I can relate to you maybe as, a parent, maybe as a neighbor, maybe as, whatever it is that you can find some common thread with. And I'm optimistic. Look, I was around so many people, and I was crying. I cried last night. I got to say, I got to be honest with you. I cried, and I was around a lot of people who cried. But I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, because I've always felt that out of pain, out of crisis, out of trauma, something good will come. And I know that those of us who felt hurt and felt harmed yesterday and ignored and really betrayed, I know that there will be a reaction to that cause. So I just think that, look, we have to be optimistic. Those of us who've had harm inflicted upon us, we're the most resilient people. We're the most hopeful people, because we realize that there's always a tomorrow, no matter what's happened in the past. So thank you for this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just maybe picking back on what you shared, Supervisor Sarmiento. I think resilience, right? I was thinking, okay, one of the things that comes to mind for me is we're a lot stronger than we give ourselves credit for, and we're strongest when we're together, too. And so I think engaging some of these things that cause us to feel uncomfortable, I get it. Like, we don't want to do uncomfortable things, but we're a lot stronger, we're a lot more resilient than we think we are. And just that whole image of iron sharpening iron. There's a temptation to silo and to become more homogenous, to align with those people that think like I do, that look at the world like I do, because it's comfortable, but we don't get stronger there, right? We get stronger by doing exactly what you're talking about doing, right? Having the courage to engage something that's difficult, someone that looks at the world differently than we do, and then having the humility to acknowledge that I don't know it all, right? And that I can learn from the other. And so, Jackie, you've shaped my thinking in so many different ways over the course of our friendship and our relationship. And there's been things that you've said that I think if I weren't open to that reality that I don't know it all, I wouldn't have grown in the way that I've grown. And I think one of those things you've said is that trauma, I think it's trauma that's not transformed, it's transmitted. And so we all have trauma in our lives, and having the courage to engage it and be transformed or allow it to be transformed prevents me from transmitting it again, right? And then I think another thing that you said to me that has shaped me so much is that as much as some might say with good intentions that, like, I don't see color, I'm colorblind, right? We miss so much in approaching the world that way. No, I want to see color because that allows me to see you, and it allows me to see you and you and you, and it allows you to see me, right? And so, I mean, I think just the benefit, again, of the stronger together of listening and engaging and learning and that humility is huge.
And
That's
just
powerful.
really-
Thank you.
Yeah, really quick, as bad as it looks or feels right now, it is the perfect time to make allegiances with people who may not look like you, but they believe like you. I think right now we're going to see a lot of people who believe the same way we believe, and don't allow your apprehensions or fear push that person away, because like we all just said, stronger together. So if we all have that common belief, we can push things a lot further. So I'm just realizing that now, because it's a lot of people out there that wept last night that may not look like me. So we need to embrace each other. We need to go through the grieving process. We are in a grieving space right now, but on the other side of that grief is a fight. So let's just link up arm in arm and continue fighting with people who may not look like us. But on the other side of that, when the banquet table is spread, we're all going to eat together.
Yeah. I'm honored to be here with you all today. I want to close us with a few parting thoughts about what you value. I think that Supervisor Sarmiento, you talked about having tough conversations with people who are diametrically opposed to you is the beginning of, bringing down the walls of separation and misunderstanding and fear and hatred. And I have a couple things. One is that Martin Luther King has two quotes that I love. He talks about darkness cannot overcome darkness. Only light can do that. And that we can't be so hurt, so angry, so pissed off that we allow our light to be dim and we go into dark spaces with our own darkness. We have to be rejuvenized, transforming our trauma so that we don't transmit it, so that when we go into dark corners, we are light. And then the second thing that Martin Luther King said in 1964 in St. Louis, Missouri, he says, we must learn to live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. And I think that's where it is. And the last thing that I'll say, we tell each other in our staff meetings that we must always lead with love. Love is the conduit that will get us more than we could ever get any other way. So we must bring our light into every dark situation that we go into. There's too much at stake to be dark, to have darkness meet darkness. We must think that everyone is valuable enough that we can learn to live together as brothers and sisters or perish together as fools. And then lastly, we must lead with love. Thank you so much, Janae, for your leadership, and thank you all for tuning in online and those who are here with us. We are grateful and honored. Here's Janae.
I know we thank our panelists tonight. It was such a great conversation. I just loved hearing all the things you had to say. And I want to thank all of you that were here and then watched online. We're going to do this again in January. January 8th is going to be our last dialogue across differences, and it's going to be gender and identity differences. And we're going to have Dr. Dante come back again because he obviously knows a lot about that as well. And we're going to have a couple other panelists. So I'll encourage all of you to come back then, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Thank you.
We invite you all to the conference room where we have the amazing charcuterie board from Sister Kelly Fisher, the wife of Rob Fisher. So you all are welcome to come back there with us, and also we have some gifts for you. So are we off the